Nikki Haley announced that the U.S. is pulling out of the Human Rights Council at the UN. Let's watch, and then I'll break it down.
For too long, the Human Rights Council has been a protector of human rights abusers and a cesspool of political bias. Regrettably, it is now clear that our call for reform was not heeded. Human rights abusers continue to serve on and be elected to the Council. The world's most inhumane regimes continue to escape scrutiny, and the Council continues politicizing and scapegoating of countries with positive human rights records in an attempt to distract from the abusers in their ranks. Therefore, as we said we would do a year ago, if we did not see any progress, the United States is officially withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council. In doing so, I want to make it crystal clear that this step is not a retreat from human rights commitments. On the contrary, we take this step because our commitment does not allow us to remain a part of a hypocritical and self-serving organization that makes a mockery of human rights.
You know, the feelings that I got when I first saw this video, we don't have accurate descriptors for them. Like, we need to invent a new emotion that encapsulates the sensation that I got as I watched that. Because hypocrisy isn't a strong enough word. There needs to be a word that goes above and beyond, like the most extreme version of hypocrisy that rattles somebody deeply to their core, to the point where they don't even believe what they're watching as it unfolds in front of them, because that's what was happening right here. I mean, from one sentence to the next, it got funnier and funnier and funnier and more outlandish and unbelievable. So, first of all, let's go to the beginning. She says, the Human Rights Council is protecting human rights abusers. To which I say that's absolutely true. Like when the United States put Saudi Arabia on the Human Rights Council. Saudi frickin' Arabia. You know, the country that officially has Sharia law. You know, the country that beheads people in the public square. And they do it for shit like sorcery and witchcraft and drug smuggling. The country that forces women to cover up from head to toe, them, that just allowed women to drive like 17 minutes ago, and then, by the way, sentenced to death the activists who were fighting for women to have the right to drive. You know, that country, we argued in favor of them going on the Human Rights Council. They're on the Human Rights Council right now. Right now. So when she says the Human Rights Council is protecting human rights abusers, I say absolutely, that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing. And by the way, us being on there in the first place was preposterous. So in a way, I actually agree with this idea of like, oh, we're going to get off the Human Rights Council. Why? Because the notion that we're in favor of human rights is beyond laughable. Just our close allegiance with Saudi Arabia is one example how we're not in favor of human rights. Or I don't know, maybe the fact that this very day we support 73% of the world's dictatorships. That's a fact. That's a fact. We give them weapons, we give them money. So, and that's not even mentioning our, hey, we just did the Iraq War, an offensive invasion on a country that didn't attack us, which killed minimum 200,000 civilians. We did torture. Trump just signed a pro-torture executive order. He just did it. Not that long ago, the night when he gave his first State of the Union. He was bragging, yeah, we're bringing it back. So the country that brags about torture, the country that brags about indefinite detention like we still do, the country that does the Iraq War, that is still in Afghanistan almost 2 decades later, and Al-Qaeda's gone there. We're bombing 8 countries. We assassinate people who are American citizens. No due process, no trial, no nothing. That was Obama and Trump. But hey, the reason we're pulling out of the UN Human Rights Council is because we really believe in human rights and they don't. Nikki Haley, you're a fucking joke. You're a joke. You know what happens when Nikki Haley and the U.S., when we make the grandstanding fucking speech, we're leaving, you know how the world reacts? They laugh at you. They laugh at you. You're a fucking sick joke is what you are. Anybody who's familiar with the empirical evidence, the objective reality of the situation, looks at you and they fucking laugh in your face. You smug prick. She says it's a cesspool of political bias. Now I'm going to explain what that means in a second. They scapegoat countries with good human rights records. You know what she's referring to, right? You know what she's referring to? Israel. So that's really why we're withdrawing here. Oh, there's such a bias against Israel. It's unbelievable. So what sparked the U.S.? What was the last straw where the U.S. was like, we have to leave this? The UN just accepted a resolution in the General Assembly that said Israel was responsible for the violence that we just saw unfold in Gaza. Now, the reason that the UN accepted that resolution, and the vote was overwhelming, only 10 voted against it, the reason they accepted that resolution is because Israel was responsible for the violence that just happened in Gaza. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. How many dead Israeli civilians are there? 0. How many dead Israeli soldiers are there? 0. How many injured Israeli soldiers or civilians are there? 0. How many on the other side? Thousands. Thousands. We have on video them sniping journalists. We have Israeli soldiers on video sniping paramedics. We have them killing people as they pray. So the reason why the UN says, hey, we're going to blame Israel for this is because Israel is to blame for this. Now, what's funny is the U.S. always tries to obfuscate and deflect. So they said, well, what if we add this amendment that says blame Hamas too? And the UN said, no, we're not going to do that. Why? Because the facts of this case are, it's not Hamas's fault, it's Israel's fault. It's like if you have a trial for a murderer, and then during that trial, the prosecutors are like, well, what if we also go after Charles Manson? And the defense is like, but Charles Manson had nothing to do with this. And then the prosecutor's like, oh, I guess you're saying Charles Manson isn't bad. No, that's not what they're saying. That's not what they're saying at all. And to prove that, there was a separate resolution, totally not related to the recent occurrence in Israel and Palestine, where they said to the UN, hey, do you dislike Hamas? Or are you against Hamas? Or do you want to condemn Hamas? Overwhelming majority said, yes, we'll condemn Hamas. So what they're saying is, hey, we're not for Hamas, but in this particular last incident, it was Israel's fault. Why? Because it was Israel's fault. What does the U.S. do? Throws a tantrum. Oh, I can't believe there's political bias against Israel. Oh, why do you single out Israel? Oh my God, Israel. The idea that the UN is like openly more hostile to Israel than anybody else is laughable, particularly because the UN gave us Israel. The UN gave us Israel. And then, by the way, what they point to is so misleading. They go, oh, look at the condemnations coming out of the United Nations for Israel. Most of them are for Israel. Well, that's only in the General Assembly, which is fucking toothless. It's like saying, oh, by the way, that's like the whole point of the General Assembly is like, oh, by the way, like here's something that we're going to get out there. Like, hey, maybe apartheid is wrong and violating international law is wrong. Just saying. And the U.S. gets angry because, oh my God, you single out Israel. That's only in the General Assembly. What about in the Security Council where it actually matters? The UN went 14 years without saying anything against Israel. So if anything, the bias is in the other direction. And then even in the Human Rights Council, even the Security Council, when they do it, they don't end up doing anything. So it was 2002 was the last time they were like, hey, maybe Israel stopped with the apartheid and the illegal occupation. 2002. And then Obama's last year, they did a little thing where they're like, okay, maybe stop with the illegal occupation. But 14 fucking years they went without saying anything against Israel. But the symbolic slap on the wrist in the General Assembly, it has the U.S. apoplectic. Oh, we're going to leave here. How dare you condemn? And that's the final point is they're like, even if it was like a majority of the fucking outrage pointed at Israel, maybe, just maybe, it's because there's an illegal occupation going on. and because there's apartheid going on, and because they're routinely violating Palestinians' human rights. Maybe, just maybe. Maybe it's not like, oh, every country in the world is just so deeply and irrationally anti-Semitic. Maybe they're not anti-Semites. Maybe they're actually looking at the human rights record of Israel, and they're going, oh, there's a problem here, and we're going to point that out. But no, everything is obfuscate, deflect, cesspool of political bias. You're right, the UN is a cesspool of political bias. A cesspool of political bias in favor of the U.S. and our allies, which is why Saudi Arabia sits on the Human Rights Council, which is why, we never get fucking condemnations against us. So it's really sad, man. It's really sad. We throw around our weight like a fucking bully on a playground. That's what we do. And we shriek and scream bias whenever somebody tepidly points out, hey, maybe you're not perfect, maybe Israel's not perfect, maybe you guys need to look in the mirror a little bit. And it's just, it's a joke. It's a joke. This administration is a joke. It's not saying other administrations were good, they weren't. But this is like, one sentence to the next, just oozing with arrogance and contempt and stupidity. That's what I got from that Nikki Haley speech.